All right, well, we're going to continue on with what we've been talking about so far, which is the idea that each Montana tribe has its own history. Now, until recently, there are only 7 reservations for a lot of different tribes, and they just added an 8th reservation about 4 years ago. So that was brand new. So we're going to continue on. We've talked about the Northern Cheyenne people, which is the population group that most of our class is a part of. And then we looked at the other one that was recently created, the Little Shell tribe. And so let's go ahead and take a look at the notes that you have. We did watch that little video clip of the Crow people and a little bit about how those 3 different tribal groups from the Crow came here. They were once part of the Sioux Nation, and they broke off about 1,400 AD. So about 600 years ago, they were part of the Sioux tribe. And in fact, one of the guys that's part of the Crow tribe that lives here in southeastern Montana said that there's history when they went down the Mississippi River, and there was a story about a cow getting attacked by an alligator. So they saw an alligator pull a cow in the water. So that tribe has been all over the U.S. They started way out on the eastern side of the United States, and they've been moving westward for a lot of years. Their language was part of the Sioux language until about 2,000 years ago or less. Maybe 1,500 years ago, and the language started changing so that they have kind of their own language, but it was a different language stem. So we're going to look at some other stuff on your handouts today, and we'll look at your maps together, and we'll figure out a little bit more about the history of different tribes in Montana, and you can see how they're all different. And that's the main point that the Teachers Association of Montana wants you guys to learn, is that the tribal histories are different, and it's good that you guys know some of those differences. So we're going to highlight some things that we find out about the history of each of these tribes, and then we're going to make at least 2 notes about each tribe. And if you really struggle to write, you can write at least 1 thing about each tribe. So we're going to take some turns taking notes and highlighting stuff. So we've already talked about the Little Shell tribe, made up of Ojibwe, Métis, and the Cree people, and they're in Great Falls now. They have about 6,500 members between those 3 tribes. So they own a little over a square mile of land around Great Falls, Montana. So we also have some other cities, the Northern Cheyenne people, which is right on the edge of the reservation. It's just to the west of here. So there's the Northern and Southern Cheyenne. The Southern Cheyenne are in Oklahoma. And so the Northern Cheyenne group divided up into 4 other groups. Some went to Nebraska. Some went to Miles City and Fort Keogh. Some joined the Southern Cheyenne in Oklahoma, and some went to Wind River Agency, a reservation in Wyoming. But the Tongue River Reservation is now the Northern Cheyenne Reservation, and that started about 140 years ago. So we looked at that. We looked at the Crow people. Then we saw that the Crow people fought with the U.S. military. And in the 1870s, during the Indian War for the West, they helped be scouts for fighting against the Sioux Nation and against the Nez Perce. So even General Custer had some Crow scouts serving in his military. But even so, they got moved on to a reservation in the Bighorn County and Yellowstone counties. So here's the reservation that we're in. A lot of you know that we put a little note right here for our town. And there's the Crow Reservation. It goes right up to Hardin. So all of this stuff all the way down to the Wyoming border and almost all the way over to Billings and Laurel is the Crow Reservation. So So you can see this big yellow outline is where all the Crow people used to be. So we've kind of looked at our 2 reservations here in southeastern Montana, and we also looked at the Little Shell tribe that was just established 4 years ago. They officially got their own place to stay right here in Great Falls and a little bit outside of Great Falls. So they have a little square mile or a little bit more of their own land. One thing we're going to find out when we look at these different reservations, one of the things we're going to find out is that a lot of times it's not just Native American people groups living on reservations. There's also non-tribal people living on the reservations. And how many of you guys know where Wolf Point is? You ever gone to Wolf Point or Poplar? Anybody driven up there before?
Yeah.
You did? I went there and I bought a truck a couple years ago. Yeah. Is that where your cousins are? Yeah. Now there's maybe 5,000 people or so in Wolf Point, but they have 4 auto dealers. Yeah, they have 4 different automobile dealers. So I went up there and I bought a used truck, and it wasn't a Native-owned business, but they had Native-owned businesses there too. So it was just, so they have kind of their own separate government for people that are Native American and people that are not Native American.
Me and my grandma Poplar went there.
You've been up there? Yeah.
What did you?
So here's where that reservation is. That's at the Fort Peck Reservation. You guys see the distance here? Where we're at in Ashland all the way up here? That was 212 miles to get up here to the town where I bought my truck. Because I drove it back home and I kept track of the mileage just to see how long it would take.
What about your wife?
Yeah, she drove me up there in our other car, so we both had to drive both home. So.
Does she wear dresses?
Well, let's talk a little bit about what's going on at the Fort Peck Indian Reservation. Can you find that one on your handout that I just gave you? The Fort Peck one? It's kind of a little bit darker. You guys see the one that's a little bit darker?
Yeah, this one right here? Mm-hmm.
It's got a little bit darker highlighting on it. Yeah. Yep, that's the one.
This one?
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, that looks right. Yep. That Fort Peck one. Yep, you got it. You have it in the bag? You find that one?
There's water in the
Yeah, that's the one. Okay, so highlight as best you can. Let's look at some of those things that we read about the Fort Peck Reservation on here. So it's got different tribes on there. It's got who? The Assiniboine and the Sioux tribes. So there's more than one tribe. And if you look on this map, here's where the Sioux were at, right? You see where the Sioux were at? And you see where the Assiniboine were? So historically, did they both live up here?
Yeah.
The Assiniboine is really close to where they usually had their territory, right? But the Sioux are usually further down in the southeast, kind of more into South Dakota and Wyoming area.
I went to South Dakota.
Mm-hmm. So the Fort Peck Reservation has 2 distinct Indian nations, and these each have their own bands. So the Sioux band, like right there. So the Sioux bands are the Canoe Paddler Band and the Red Bottom Band. That's for the Assiniboine. The Sioux is the Hunk Papa. Have you guys heard of that one before?
Hunk Papa.
Hunk Papa, Sisseton, Wapaton, and Yankton. These are Yankton, South Dakota. So that really ties in with the Sioux.
Should be Hunk
So these groups constitute the reservation. So there was a U.S. government federal homestead legislation that lets non-Indian people settle in Fort Peck Reservation. So you know how I told you that I bought my truck up there, and that wasn't necessarily a Native American owned auto dealership. So they have other people besides just Native Americans living on that reservation. So they each have their own government. Each has its own separate government. So for history-wise, they lived mostly in Montana's Roosevelt County. They also have parts of counties of Valley, Daniels, and Sheridan. Does anybody know how many counties there are in Montana? Anybody know how many counties there are in Montana?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, there's 5.
59. 59. And
I just missed the 9.
And this tribe is in 4 of those counties. The reservation is in parts of 4 different counties out here. So this Fort Peck Reservation is in 4 different Montana counties out of 59.
But Lily, look how big it is.
So how big is it? It's 110 miles across the west, and it's 50 miles from north to south. So where I grew up, I don't know if you guys can see that map from where you're at. We'll just spin this over here so people can see the map over our door.
Not us.
Yeah, you can see it too, right? Remember I told you I grew up over here in Iowa?
Yeah.
That's about 300 miles across and about 150.
Your big one?
It went about 150 miles up and down, north and south. So this is 50 miles north and south in Montana and 110 across. It's like 1/9 of the whole state of Iowa. That's how big that reservation is. It's more than 10% of the state. Isn't that pretty crazy?
Yeah.
So just for those 2 tribes, and how many people did it say it was? Or did it say it here? I don't remember. I don't think that too many of the tribes are really huge.
How can the people see then?
How can people see what? How can people see what?
No, it's 2 on the front. Has in the left.
Oh, how can they see the screen?
Yeah.
Oh, well, you guys can kind of see what paragraph they're in, right?
No.
Like let's look at these first 3 paragraphs. So
They're over there right now?
So most of these reservations, like these 2 big towns in the reservation, are only about 4,000 or 5,000 people apiece. And it doesn't really give too much of the history, but we're going to find out some more about the Sioux tribes and the Cinnabon, because they're also parts of other reservations in Montana. So we'll go ahead and keep moving on from here. In fact, this next one, the Cinnabon and Gross Venture, are at Fort Belknap. So if you go to the next tribe over, can everybody see this one? You see that Fort Belknap?
Yeah.
That's got some of Cinnabon people in it too. So some of the Cinnabon people went to Fort Peck, and some of them went to Fort Belknap Reservation. So we'll find out a little bit more about their history in that group. And we also have the Gross Venture tribes. So that's normally their home area. The Blackfeet are kind of all up in here, right along the edge of the Rocky Mountains. And that's where the Blackfeet tribes have been. And then the Gross Venture have been, they kind of work together on stuff. So we're going to see what they did at Fort Belknap.
Is that too tight?
So
Is that too tight or okay?
the Cinnabon and the Gross Venture tribes at Fort Belknap. created in 1887. The ancestors of these tribes have lived in the northern plains for several centuries. So the Assiniboine, the Europeans thought they were part of the Sioux nation because they speak a Sioux language. However, it's from the Chippewa word that means cooked with stones. So at some point, the Assiniboine band broke with the traditional Sioux and aligned themselves with the Cree. So do you suppose that happens from time to time? People from one nation decide, hey, I'm going to not be part of this nation anymore, and I'm going to be part of another nation?
I wrote this one.
Okay. So sometimes that happens in Europe. Have you guys seen borders in Europe?
Yeah.
They change a lot. Throughout history, the borders in Europe have changed a whole bunch of times. So we're going to take a look at, so these guys have kind of switched allegiances. They used to be with the Assiniboine, used to be with the Cree, but they've kind of switched over, or used to be with the Sioux, and they switched over to be with the Cree people. So they hunted along the Milk River, the Yellowstone River, and southern Canada. So they went as far as southern Canada. And they added horses and firearms.
Shane.
That's okay.
Is Shane allowed on this thing?
Yeah, it's in the video.
Yeah.
So they quickly switched over to hunting and trading. They used to do more farming and stuff in the woods. So the Gros Ventre separated from the Arapaho, and they were original inhabitants of the Western Plains. So the Gros Ventre used the Blackfeet language and were considered part of the Blackfeet Nation. So these two tribes kind of switched around a little bit. You know where the Arapaho are now? They tend to be in the southwestern part of the United States. So yeah. So there's people that came up from the southwestern part of the U.S. to Montana, and then these Gros Ventre that separated from the Arapaho, they used to do a lot more farming. In fact, if you go to the southwestern part of the U.S., they do a lot more corn and squash and bean planting and harvesting. And so now they came up here, and then they got horses, and they started doing a lot more hunting and trading.
I'm sorry. Lila, does she go with you or Mrs. Emmons? Because she's here. And she's standing outside. Mrs. Emmons or? Oh.
I just saw her go out the door. Yeah. Sorry. Okay. So now we have this group that has moved up from the south and has joined up with so the Assiniboine is usually here. So if we look at this map, the Assiniboine were always kind of in this area of Montana in the plains, and then the Gros Ventre that's on the Fort Belknap Reservation moved up here. So we have the Assiniboine and the Gros Ventre at Fort Belknap. Let's take a look at the next page, and let's take a look at the next page. It should be on the back, and we'll look at the Blackfeet. That'll be the last group we look at today.
There's one right here.
What's that?
There's one right here.
Yeah, the back of that page that we were just looking at. The Blackfeet.
Well, I'm just gonna go on.
Yeah. Historians believe the Blackfeet were forced out of the upper Great Lakes. Anybody know where the upper Great Lakes were? Anybody remember? Let's take a look at our U.S. map again. Up here over the door. So everybody see these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lakes up here? This is the Great Lakes. And the Blackfeet tribe, when white settlers came in over here from Europe, got pushed this direction, they ended up way over here. Does that seem like a long way to move?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Remember me telling you about my grandmother, my great grandmother coming to the United States from Scotland?
Yeah.
She took a boat from clear over here, and she ended up right here in the middle of the country.
What?
So lots of people groups travel. This whole group of people, the whole tribe, that ended up being part of the Blackfeet, moved this way. And some people think that even before that, they were way over here on the east coast of the United States. So does everybody have a little bit different history? Do the tribes all have a little bit different history?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this one in particular here, the Blackfeet, they got forced out of the upper Great Lakes region. And they moved all the way to the edge of the Rocky Mountains in Montana. So they headed to the west, right? People think they got their name because their moccasins get all black from walking all the way across the prairie to come to Montana.
Blackfeet.
Yeah. So some of the branches of the Blackfeet tribe, called the Bloods and the North Blackfeet, live in Canada. So where's Canada? Canada is north of the Blackfeet Reservation. So just because there's a separation between the United States and Canada here doesn't mean the Blackfeet can't go across. Yeah. So
Can't see it.
you can't see the Blackfeet. So here in the Blackfeet Reservation, just because you're here doesn't mean you don't have more family or other tribes that are related up north in Canada. So the Bloods and the North Blackfeet are now living in Canada, in Alberta. So Canada doesn't call their subgroups states, they call them provinces. And so the province of Canada, our province of Alberta in Canada, is where some of the Blackfeet tribe lives. So they used to go into southern Canada, all the way through Montana, all the way to the Yellowstone National Park. So the Yellowstone National Park is way down here. Right? Here's West Yellowstone. So they went all the way across the state. The Blackfeet were all the way across the state, up and down. Right? What do you suppose keeps them from going all the way to the Pacific Ocean?
Sharks?
Have you guys ever tried to walk over the Rocky Mountains?
Yeah.
They're really high. So that's kind of a natural barrier here to keep people from traveling all the way across the United States to the Pacific
I've
Ocean.
5 hills before.
You guys all know about Lewis and Clark, right?
No.
You guys ever heard of that expedition? In 1802, there was a purchase by one of the U.S. presidents from France, and France didn't really have the right to do it, but they sold the U.S. the territory that the Native Americans lived on. And so the U.S. was sending some explorers to try and find a way all the way through to the Pacific Ocean, through the mountains. And did they find anything?
No.
They found a way over, but not by river. They were hoping they could take a river all the way over, but they can't. You guys remember seeing pictures of the dogs on the travois? You guys remember last week I showed you those pictures of the dogs pulling those little sleds?
Yeah.
So that's what these Plains warriors, the Blackfeet, used to use before they had horses. But once they got horses, and then they eventually got rifles from U.S. traders, they used to. They were one of the first tribes to force bison to jump off of a cliff. You guys ever hear about buffalo jumps? You guys haven't heard of buffalo jumps before? No. So the tribal hunter guys knew where the steep cliffs were, and they would get on their horses and they would ride and chase all the buffalo, and they would herd the buffalo up. And then you know what they would do with them, Lilith? They would herd these buffalo up, and they'd have horses all around them, and they'd keep pushing them and pushing them, and those buffalo would get scared and run, and they'd run right off a cliff. And then when they fell down and crashed, then they would shoot them with their arrows and stab them with their spears, and then they would use their hides to make their tents and their teepees and their clothing, and then they would use the meat to eat. So that's what they would do. They would try and round up some of the buffalo.
Just use the skin for clothes and stuff.
Yeah, and for the teepees. Yeah. So they did this until the U.S. Soldiers and some of the people would come out and shoot all the buffaloes so that the Native Americans wouldn't have anything to eat. And that forced them on the reservations.
What was that with the first one?
I'll put it back. So let's go ahead and see that they were one of the biggest. They were one of the biggest tribes on the northern Great Plains, and they were fighters. So they went out and did a lot of fighting. They were doing battle, having lots of fights. And so they ended up with the gross gentry up here on the Blackfeet Reservation. So people that were normally living in this area all ended up on the reservation there by 1888. So by 1888, most of the buffalo had disappeared. So the U.S. government kind of forced the Blackfeet and the gross gentry to live on the reservation. So I do have sheets of paper for all of you. We'll just take some notes about what we've just been highlighting. Take some notes about what we've been highlighting so far. There you go.
I'm just gonna go.
We have recess recess. So let's go back to that first page of notes. Go back to that one, the Assiniboine and Sioux tribes on Fort Peck. So we started over here and we kind of went across the top. We skipped over Rocky Boy for now. So let's look at the Fort Peck Reservation. So on your paper, history of Montana tribes. So put today's date on there, history of Montana tribes. Anybody need another pencil? Okay, good. History of Montana tribes.
History of Montana tribes.
I'm going
Let's take a few notes about what we find in the history of Montana tribes. So we have the Assiniboine. So did the Assiniboine live in this area already? They did, didn't they? The Assiniboine already
It's too
Where?
bright, I can't see. No, it's good.
Okay, I'll see if I can change that focus. Is that any better?
Yeah, it's a lot better.
The Assiniboine lived in northeast Montana. So that's where they started, right? The Assiniboine already lived in northeast Montana. Where did they end up? They ended up on the Fort Peck Reservation. Yeah, they ended up on the Fort Peck Reservation. They ended up on the Fort Peck Reservation. So that people already had a history, and they did some agriculture, because that's an agricultural area. There's probably some hunting there, but they, right now, there's a lot of people that farm wheat and things like that up there.
Are they trying to find food right now?
Yeah, it's not very high elevation. We're at about 3,000 feet, and they're at about 2,000 feet. So they're a little bit lower. They're a little closer to sea level than here. So it's a little bit less cold there in the wintertime, although it's still cold because it's further north of here. But they have a little bit of a growing season where they can grow some plants. And they live along a lot of the rivers up there. So they still are close to rivers.
I got it right then.
Yeah, they're close to rivers. So they can still grow crops. So the other group is the Sioux. The Sioux tribe. And if we looked on the map, they lived over here in Wyoming and South Dakota. So the Sioux moved from South Dakota, Wyoming, and southeast Montana. Has anybody here gone on 212 all the way to Alzada?
Yeah.
You guys have driven through all the way to Wyoming and South Dakota on 212?
Yeah. My
So,
mom and dad had.
That's where the Sioux people were living before. So they made a little move.
I had to stay with my grandma.
You guys ready to do a quick stretch? Let's stand for a quick stretch. Feet a little bit apart, arms out to the side. Let's do a windmill. Across. And back up. Across. Back up. Let's go down and do a toe touch. And back up. Let's try and walk our fingers through the middle. Back up. Okay. Go ahead and sit back down. All right. Good. So, Sioux moved from South Dakota, Wyoming, and southeastern Montana to end up on the Fort Peck Reservation. So that's quite a ways from home. And the Sioux used to be all over the plains, right? They were probably the biggest population group as far as area goes. So we'll find out a little bit more about them later. So let's look some more at the Cinnabone. They not only lived in northeast Montana already and ended up at Fort Peck, they also ended up at Fort Belknap. So we can add Fort Peck and Fort Belknap. Okay. Fort Peck and Fort Belknap.
I didn't correct you that.
That's fine. So who else was at Fort Belknap with them? The Gross Venture. So here we have the Assiniboine and the Gross Venture ended up here. And here. Assiniboine ended up at Fort Peck also.
I need to write up.
And the Gross Venture ended up at Fort Belknap and the Blackfeet Reservation. So let's write a little bit about the Blackfeet, or Gross Venture. So the Gross Venture tribes were in north central Montana. And moved onto Fort Belknap. And Blackfeet Reservation. So it seems like the Assiniboine and the Gross Venture really didn't move very far from their original areas. They kind of stayed where they were at. But those reservation areas were smaller. They couldn't do some of their traditional activities. A lot of the tribes were mobile and they moved around and hunted in different spots. You guys ever go to the TP races? When they, at the St. Lebré when they do the TP races?
Yeah.
Takes them not very long to take down and put up those teepees. In fact, a lot of times they pack up and move in about an hour and a half. Can you imagine if someone came to your house or your grandparents' house and said, you have an hour and a half to pack everything you have and move? Would that be hard?
We had to tell that to my Uncle Joey.
You had to go through that? You have to move a lot? Yeah.
Why? Can I write up? Because there's some people that's going after him.
Right on top.
Yeah.
Do you need some of the top info?
Yeah.
Oh,
Joey? He lives at the country house. My Uncle Joey.
So do you guys ever have to move around? No?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? Okay, yeah.
My
I
grandma.
know it takes a long time for us to pack up and move, but we usually have to like clean up the houses.
I used
and
to
stuff.
go and visiting Target and Woody, and I was in the village down here.
Okay.
What is that? My great grandma give that to us. No, the thing you got here.
Which thing? Which line?
Under history.
Under
It needs
history?
to be repaired.
That's in the point. That's right.
Yeah, but
Cinnamon. The Cinnamon already lived in northeast Montana. They ended up in Fort Bend Reservation in Fort Bend. If you have your notes done, you may turn in all of your papers. Make sure your name's on the notes. Go ahead and turn that stuff in the social studies bin. Yep. Go ahead and turn that in the social studies bin, and we'll start getting ready for recess.
Okay, done. You done, Karen? Yeah.